Welcome to This Explainer. Now, I am talking directly to you today. Yes, you, the highly capable, fiercely independent, but let's be honest, deeply exhausted person watching this right now. You know who you are. You're the one everyone relies on, right? The one who always knows how to get things done. But behind all that competence, there's a heavy toll. Today, we're unpacking the fascinating and frankly kind of heart-wrenching psychological research behind a very specific behavioral pattern, the absolute inability to ask for help. All right, picture this. It's a super familiar scene. Your deadlines are piling up. Your eyes are heavy with exhaustion. You are literally drowning in tasks, just barely holding it all together. And yet, when someone walks up to you, sees your obvious struggle, and offers you a lifeline, what do? You automatically smile, push down all that overwhelm, and deliver this classic lie. I'm fine. I've got it. If you just felt, a little tightening in your chest hearing that, you are definitely not alone. That's the feeling of something getting uncomfortably close to a truth you've probably been quietly managing for years, because somewhere along the way you learned a hidden, unspoken rule. Okay, let's dive into this. Why exactly is needing people perceived by your brain as something so incredibly dangerous? To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to clear up a massive misconception. The common assumption out there is that people who never ask for help are just proud or stubborn or maybe even a little arrogant. And sure, for a tiny handful of people, maybe that's true. But for the vast majority who genuinely struggle to reach out, the clinical reality is completely different. It is not a character flaw. It's actually an outdated survival strategy. It's a deeply rooted defense mechanism designed specifically to protect your nervous system. So let's trace this back to where it all started. At some point in your life, probably when you were pretty young, you reached out. You showed someone you were struggling. But instead of getting support, you faced dismissal, frustration, or maybe that person was just physically or emotionally unavailable. Your nervous system, which by the way is extraordinarily good at pattern recognition, logged a critical rule right then and there. Needing people equals disappointment or worse, rejection. So you adapted. You became completely self-sufficient to ensure you would never make others uncomfortable with your needs again. Now, what's really fascinating here is the data behind how distorted our perception actually gets because of this adaptation. According to a 2008 study by researchers Flynn and Lake, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, we dramatically underestimate how willing others are to help us by almost 50%. Let that sink in for a second. We walk around genuinely but entirely falsely believing that asking for help is this massive burden to those around us. But, here's the catch. Knowing that statistic doesn't magically make it any easier to reach out. Why? Because asking doesn't feel like a simple everyday transaction. It feels like a literal threat to who you are. When you spend years, maybe even decades, building an identity around being the one who does not need help, admitting you can't handle something threatens that entire competent persona. That persona is load-bearing. It holds your self-worth together. If you ask for help, your brain basically tells you that whole image is going to collapse. So instead, you pay this really steep cost of competence. You just run on fumes. You stay up way too late solving problems alone that a 5-minute conversation could have easily fixed. You tell yourself, oh, I'll ask for help when things get really bad. But you just constantly redefine what really bad actually is because your threshold for quiet suffering just keeps rising. And the cruelest irony of the whole shebang, the more hyper-competent you become, the more invisible your struggle becomes to everyone else. You've effectively trained the people around you to stop checking in because you always seem fine. Think about how this plays out in our relationships too, whether that's romantic, friendships, or family. We basically create this invisible ledger. For someone who can't ask for help, giving feels incredibly safe. It keeps the power totally balanced. If you're the one helping, you aren't vulnerable. You're needed. Receiving, on the other hand, that feels intensely exposing and vulnerable. Over time, the relationship gets totally lopsided. The giver substitutes being needed for actual secure attachment, which leaves them feeling completely unseen and quietly resentful, while the other person just feels vaguely guilty without even knowing why. To ground all this emotion in some actual science, we can look to John Bowlby's foundational attachment theory. He introduced this concept called internal working models. These are essentially mental templates that form very early in life, and they dictate how we believe relationships work, what we can expect from others, and, crucially, whether our own needs are actually worth meeting. These templates, they just run silently in the background of our minds, dictating our behavior long after we've grown up. So here is the absolutely crucial point. Your rational mind knows the logic. It knows the statistics, it knows people probably want to help you. But your nervous system, it simply doesn't care about logic. Trying to outthink this deeply ingrained defense mechanism is exactly like telling someone with an intense fear of heights that falling is statistically unlikely. I mean, sure, the rational mind hears you, but the nervous system is already sounding the fire alarm. Pure insight alone just isn't enough to change the behavior. All right, let's move on and see how this builds into actual actionable change. How do we rewire that nervous system? Well, it's not going to be some dramatic overnight breakthrough. It happens in slow, deliberate, repeated steps. Step 1, you've got to ask for something small. Step 2, you have to survive the vulnerability of making that ask. You need to actually notice that the person didn't pull away, that they weren't burdened, and that you are still whole after being seen as someone with a need. And finally, step 3, grieve for the younger self. That last part, the grief, it's vital. To truly let go of this pattern, you have to acknowledge and actually thank the old survival strategy before it can step aside. I want you to really hear this, that hyper-independence was protecting a younger version of you who reached out and wasn't met. It did its job. It kept you safe when you needed it most. But now, it's time to compassionately name those unmet needs, thank the armor for its service, and give yourself permission to gently put it down. To see just how stubbornly that armor holds on, let's bring it back to a highly relatable, standard day at work. A colleague sees you're completely overloaded and simply says, "Hey, do you want me to take something off your plate?" What happens internally? You feel a flash of panic, maybe even offense. You immediately say, "No, I'm good, thanks though." And then you spend the next 4 hours silently resenting the massive workload while simultaneously feeling this odd, hollow pride that you didn't accept their help. It's an exhausting paradox. If that scenario just gave you a super familiar ache of recognition, I want to leave you with this final thought today. The strength you developed by doing everything alone is incredibly real, and it absolutely got you to where you are today. But remember this, strength was always meant to be a bridge, not a destination. You were never built to carry everything alone. The capacity to receive is just as mature as the capacity to give. So ask yourself, the people who want to support you do exist, but you've been so good at not needing them, they don't even know you do. What would happen if, just once today, you let someone cross that bridge to help you?